welcome to GlideFast On Air, today's webinar, Breaking Down the Common Service Data Model. I'm Lauren Jankowski, the Marketing Specialist here at GlideFast Consulting, and I'll be moderating today's webinar. I'm very excited to introduce to you our presenters for today, Jacob Banker, a Service Delivery Director at GlideFast, Will Young, a Senior Solutions Architect at GlideFast, and Mark Bodman, the Senior Product Manager for CSDM at ServiceNow. Before we get started, we'd like to give you some background information on GlideFast Consulting. GlideFast is a consulting firm that is dedicated exclusively to ServiceNow. As an Elite ServiceNow Partner, our expert team of developers and architects have worked on both sides of the table, on the customer side and the consulting side. Our company was founded by ServiceNow architects, and we're proud to have a team of over 100 experienced consultants, an average CSAT score of 9.6, and many more accolades, as you can see here. We'll be monitoring the Q&A throughout today's session, so please send in any questions that arise and we'll do our best to answer them. As another perk of attending today's webinar, we'll be giving away a $50 Visa gift card at the end, so make sure you stay on till the very end to find out if you're the winner. Now, I'd like to hand things over to Jacob, Will, and Mark.
Hey, Lauren, thank you very much for the introduction. This is our agenda that we're going to go over today. We're going to talk about, do a quick intro into the CSDM. And we're going to discuss how to be successful with the Common Service Data Model. We're going to go through the crawl and walk implementation methodologies that were introduced in the CSDM 2.0. We're going to talk about the benefits of why you want to do this, why you want to follow this framework. And then we're going to talk about how you can migrate into the Common Service Data Model if you're not already there. But if we could, we're going to start off with a quick poll, actually. We're going to put up a question, and if you would take a quick second to answer and let us know how well you know the Common Service Data Model or where you are in the journey.
Awesome. So it looks like about 50% of people have said that they have seen it from a white paper or previous session. 22% of people just have heard of it. Another 21% have said that they are working on getting aligned with the framework, and 5% of people don't know where to start yet. All
right. Thank you very much for taking the time to fill that in and that information. Mark, do you want to do the intro?
Sure. Thanks for having me. This is a new announcement that we put out there in Knowledge 20, our recent conference. It's called Service Graph. And what it is a broader context for how a CMDB is kind of growing beyond just infrastructure and software. We're really looking at the entire life cycle of the IT products and services that you develop within your organization. And so CSDM is really the guidance. It's the model that describes everything from ideation and conception of a new service or a digital product or service, all the way through the operational needs from a traditional CMDB. So it includes CMDB, but goes way beyond that. And we look at this as sort of a foundation for our products and how they all work together, sharing data and contributing to the data that is used across the entire life cycle. So that's what Service Graph is all about. And go to the next slide. And how this ties into the CSDM topic for today is really the three areas that Service Graph kind of focuses on: development, operations, and service management, are represented in the model. So you're going to see one color represent design, things that are more conceptual in nature and where you do your design work and planning work. Operations from a infrastructure management, technology service management, and then service management, which is more or less, how do you interface with your customer base? It all uses the similar data. We're all on the same platform, and therefore the data model, the CSDM data model, has become fundamental to how our products work together and how customers need to look at their data so that it all interacts, right? It all comes together in the end. And really, one of the things I'd like to clarify for a lot of our customers, what CSDM really is and isn't. And a lot of folks will confuse that with a product, something they can buy. It's not something that you have as a tangible thing. It's really a best practice and guidance. It's how you actually express the elements that are in our model so that you can leverage them within the products and even extending the products within your own organization with your own app. So this is, it's really a framework. It's not a product. It's not something you can buy, but it is something that our partners and our own product teams are all starting to converge on and evolve as we continue to get feedback or add more products to our portfolio. And really, the little bit of background on this, I was a product manager for a product we had called App Portfolio Management here at ServiceNow in 2017. And we identified where we needed to get our heads together across all the different product managers on the type of data that we were managing and how it was managed, how it interacted with one another. And so it was really the initial goal was to get consistency, but we also found a huge internal need across the whole portfolio of products. And that's expanded to CSM and into HR now. And the customers and partners have asked for this too, because historically, depending on who you went to, you had different perspectives on things. And so we wanted to consolidate that so that we were able to maximize on, the collective feedback from all our partners and customers and make sure that the products all came together. And it also keeps evolving. So it doesn't stop at 2.0. We've got a 3.0 version planned to come out and coinciding with our Paris release. So we'll add more things to CSDM as we go, as we continue to evolve.
Thank you very much for that introduction. So now we're going to cover what does it take to be successful with this, to do this. As you can see, the very first bullet there is that you need upper management buy-in. This is not something that you as the ServiceNow admins or ServiceNow developers can kind of do on your own. There's a lot of data elements across all of IT that you're going to really need all of IT involved to help you defining all of these different elements and keeping them in line. But your role as the admins and developers of your instance is to understand the definitions, understand the table structures, and really understand the relationships, and then be able to evangelize why it's so important that you follow this model to really understand the benefits that you gain from sticking to this model and not deviating away from it. And then the other thing you're really going to want to look at are tools, governance, and processes. It's really not enough just to get the data into the system. You have to manage the data. You have to keep it accurate. So you really want to make sure you have the right tools, good governance, and good processes in place to keep that data accurate. All right, so understanding the CSDM, right? This is the conceptual model on the left where you can see the domains that Mark talked about at the top. You've kind of got your design domain, then you've got your operational and your sell and consume. And this is how those areas relate to the physical tables within ServiceNow, within your CMDB. So you really need to make sure you understand this structure and these tables and make sure you're putting the right data in the right places and understand which ones are operational, as you talked about, and which ones are not. Your design areas where you're doing more of that design, conceptual work or planning work, it's not your operational area. That's more in that orange area that you see here, that orange domain. But one of the common things that we've seen customers do is take the area of like business applications, and instead of putting it in the business application table, they started populating data down in the CMDB CI APPL table. But that's really a discovery table. You don't want to go down and start putting manual data into that table. You really want to make sure you're using the tables as they were intended. And again, putting the right data in the right places, because it's key to the structure and getting all the benefits down the road. The next thing that you really need to have your head around is the relationships. I use this particular slide because I wanted you to understand that this is not a hierarchical type relationship. It's not just parent-child relationships. This is, as I pointed out earlier, there's a lot of different components throughout your CMDB that make up the common service data model, and they relate to each other in a lot of different ways. So again, it's not hierarchical. It's data in different places and how they connect back to one another. So you really do want to make sure you understand this structure, use the out-of-the-box recommended relationships to the out-of-the-box recommended locations or other places within the CMDB. Don't skip over an area. If you're not ready to work on a particular area of the common service data model, don't build relationships across that to some other area. It's going to end up leaving you with relationships that are not out of the box. It's more time that you're going to have to spend undoing those when you're ready to go back to doing those. And it's not really going to help you realize the benefits of building those relationships. You want to build the right relationships to the right places. And here another example where we've seen people do things where they've gone and defined their business applications. They think they're not ready to build out their application services, so they start building relationships from the business applications all the way down to the CIs. You really don't want to do that. And if you really think about it, if you have time to put the links all the way down to your CIs from your business applications, as you'll see in a moment, really you are defining your application services, right? You are defining your deployments. So build all the different building blocks and build the relationships properly between those building blocks.
Yeah, and I like to think of the application service as the instances of your apps, right? You've got X number of instances, pre-production and production instances. So you should treat them like that.
And Philip, I see your question. We will be touching on the service mapping here in just a little bit on that. So if you don't mind, I'll save that for when we get there. All right, so the implementation methodology. How do you go about getting this data into your system? With the 2.0 release of CSDM, ServiceNow did give us a kind of prescriptive way to get started with the CSDM and to start building this data out. The first methodology is the crawl phase, right? Where you're really just focused on your applications and infrastructure, and you really get some really good quick wins. It says here ITSM, but really you can get quick wins in many different areas of the platform by basically building out your dependency maps. So if you've seen one of those kind of, I call them the money slides, where you can show your executives or your leadership a dependency map where they can see upstream and downstream how your applications and the CIs within those applications relate to one another and relate to your services. This gets you started down that path. And then the next phase is the crawl. And this is where you're not focused on the applications and infrastructure, but you're focused on the support. How do you support the application and infrastructure elements that you've just taken the time to build out? And then from there you go to run. Instead of focusing on internal technology services and technology that you provide, you're switching to a more business focus. You're focusing on what your business provides to your customer. So it's just switching the focus. You're using a lot of the same tables, you're using a lot of the same underlying structures. Again, it's just switching your focus to external. And then finally is the fly. And this is where you've got your fully built out common service data model. You've got all your applications, you've got all your infrastructure. You really start building out your business capabilities. Hopefully you're taking advantage of the information objects that were introduced in New York. I think that was a great addition to the CMDB and the common service data model, and building your catalog around the services that you've defined. For today's discussion, we're really just going to focus on the crawl and walk because it really kind of covers all the base tables. Because as I said, once you get to run, you're just switching your focus. The tables are really still the same. How do you start to crawl? So you can see here, you've got 3 areas of focus. The first one is business applications. So what is a business application? It really is a complete list of all of the applications in your environment. But it's a definition of the applications in your environment. It holds attributes about that application, like whether you bought it, off the shelf, whether you built it in-house, whether it's hosted on-prem, hosted in the cloud, those types of attributes and elements about the definition of your application. But really quick thing to point out, as we've talked about before, people getting confused, this is not SAM. This is not the same as software asset management. It can benefit software asset management and they can leverage this data heavily, but it's not SAM, and this is not operational. As you see, this is up in the design phase. This is where if you were using APM, which we'll talk about in a minute, you're looking at new applications coming into your environment. You're evaluating how those applications are performing or possibly rolling applications out of your environment. And that's really what business applications is all about. The next area is your application services. Application services, simply put, is the deployments, individual deployments of your defined business applications. So whether you're doing regional deployments, dev, QA, staging, prod, deployments by country, whatever your structure is for how that application is deployed, this is where you go in and define those applications. And this is the core element of the common service data model. If you look at the image there, you can see that the design phase goes down into application service. It's the core of the managed technical service area, and it is also the core of the sell and consume. Everything kind of comes back to here. So you really don't want to skip this area, and you really want to take the time to build this out. And this is where you get a lot of the main benefit of the common service data model, at least the quick benefits, right? And this is operational. Once you start defining your deployments of an application, oftentimes this is where you might start presenting this on your incident forms. So where a user calls in and reports an incident, they're going to choose the deployment or the application that they're having an issue with. And then finally, in this area is your configuration items, right? This is the installations of the applications down at the server levels, the servers, the routers, switches, all the hardware that makes up the deployments. So if you're doing regional deployments, what all does it take to serve the US deployment, or what all hardware does it take to serve the China deployment, or whatever different deployments you have. And again, these are operational as well. This is where you're logging incidents against the server that goes down. Maybe you're doing changes against incidents or routers, and then being able to see how that change is going to impact what deployments, and of course, what business applications are being impacted by those changes. So that's what you can gain from just doing the crawl phase. Really quickly, you can see that you can start getting a lot of benefit out of defining your applications, defining your deployments, and putting together all of the infrastructure that makes up those deployments.
Yeah,
really
and I would
quick,
just like,
yeah, please go ahead.
I was just going to add a little bit of context on the application service. Service mapping is the product that we sell to help manage those, but you don't need to use service mapping. And in the next couple of releases, there'll be a lot more functionality going into managing those application services. One of the common things we see is DevOps pipelines, where you create these instances, these deployments automatically. We're going to be providing APIs, for example, and tag-based approaches to managing those app services. So just wanted to add a little bit of color there, because a lot of questions are coming in about that.
Yeah, that sounds like some exciting new stuff coming around application services. But before we switch to the next slide, one of the things I want to point out here is, if you notice, we use the word applications 3 different times here, and all with different meanings: business applications, application service, and application installation. When you're going out talking to your business, one of the common mistakes that we see customers making is going out using this terminology to talk to people who aren't in ServiceNow or don't do a lot in ServiceNow, right? Going to your application owners, going to your hardware asset management team, or going to other areas of IT. Don't go and say, I need you to define your business applications. They're not really going to know what that term means. You need to go and talk in terms of, we need to define every application that we have running in our environment and the core elements that you're trying to gain about those applications. And that's doing your business applications. Your application services, same thing. If you go and talk to them about, I need to define all of our application services, they're not really going to understand what you're talking about. So when you go to them, start talking to them about the deployments. Hopefully you've already defined your business applications, so you can say, for this application, how are we deployed? How is this deployed in our environment? And talk about deployments. And then obviously the application installations. If you're talking to your asset team and you say the word application, they're really thinking about licensing. They're probably not thinking about any of these elements that you're looking at here. So know your audience and use the terminology that makes sense to get the data you're trying to get. Obviously, the applications installed on a server is a little bit more straightforward, but the application service and business applications have tripped up quite a few of our clients, where they try to do this without our help, and they get caught up on using the terminology as opposed to using common terms when they're going to their IT department. All right, let's go and look at some examples of how you might roll this out. So here's a pretty common example most people have, right? You have Microsoft Exchange running in your environment, so you would define that application up in your business applications that you have Microsoft Exchange, and then below you have Exchange production deployment, right? You might have multiple deployments. A lot of companies don't have Exchange deployed more than once. They only have a production deployment. But that's a pretty easy example of kind of what we're talking about. Define the application and then define the deployment. I use ServiceNow here as an example, but really this is to show the idea of a platform host and platform applications at the business application level. So if you have things like ServiceNow, SAP, Epic, any of these applications that have, the really big applications that have a lot of small modules or small applications that run on them, you can break those up as well. You can define ServiceNow as a platform host, as a business application, and then define each one of the applications within ServiceNow as a business application, and then define your deployments. And they could be separate deployments. They could go down into an individual deployment, depending on how you're structured. But just wanted to show that there is that concept. So if you are thinking about things like SAP or Epic, and one of the key benefits that you'll get from making sure you break these out is later on when you start defining your capabilities, you don't want to define all of your business capabilities and then just link them to one application of SAP. If you're doing SAP payroll, SAP finance, SAP general ledger, or all the different components, you can list those capabilities and link them to the individual modules within SAP that provide those capabilities. So if later you decide to switch that one capability, you can switch that without having to mess with SAP as a whole. You're just modifying the modules underneath there. Let's go ahead and move forward and talk about what's next. So you've defined your business applications, you've started defining your application services and building out the CIs underneath that. Where do you go from there? And as I talked about the walk phase, you're switching your focus here, right? The technical service offerings are going to be very similar to application services, but it's focused on support, not focused on deployments. So again, if you have regional support, or you're doing support by gold, silver, bronze, platinum, whatever groupings of support that you have, this is where you're going to build out that support structure and group applications and services by how they're supported and the support level you provide for them. So here you need to be thinking about those commitments. Do you offer 24/7 support? Is it 5 nines availability? Is it 15-minute response times or 30-minute response times? How are you going to respond to your application services and CIs when you have issues or when you have tickets logged against them? And then from there, you define your technical services. And these are the published versions of your services to your service owners. You do want to use your company's nomenclatures for how these are going to be structured. We're not going to prescribe to you that you should call messaging, or you should call it unified messaging or platform services or host, and tell you how they should be. It is going to follow what makes sense to your customers or to your employees, and how they are going to know what that service is and what that service contains. As you can see, it's a roll-up of your application services and technical service offerings. So a single technical service can have multiple service offerings and multiple application services rolled up underneath it. Let's go ahead and look at some examples here. Continuing the Exchange example. So you got Exchange, you got your production deployment, your production support, whatever that commitment is, again, whether it's 24-hour support, which with email and Exchange, it probably is, 5 nines availability. And as you can see, I did roll that up under a messaging. And this is where, again, you could have instant messaging also rolled up into that same service, maybe even other messaging services that you provide, all rolled up under that same technical service, just with their own service offerings, their own support levels, and their own application services that make those up. All right, and then continuing the ServiceNow, you can see now we have a support for the ServiceNow deployments, and we've rolled it up under ITSM as our service. But I wanted to show here one of the areas that people sometimes also get confused about is the fact that you can have service offerings that aren't tied to application services at all. Here you can see I've defined platform services. I've seen companies call it hosting. I've seen it called a couple different things. But this is then broken up into my Windows support and Unix Linux server support, and then the CIs that make up that service offering. Those are the CIs that are supported by that service offering. And another area that we commonly see this used is when you have specialized devices. Maybe you're in the healthcare industry, or you're somewhere where you have some specialized devices that you track in your CMDB that don't make up an application deployment. They're just specialized devices, but you still want to make sure you put your support service offerings around those devices and define those services that you're providing with those devices. So, Mark, do you have anything to add to those two areas, the implementation, crawl and walk?
I would say most organizations can reach this pretty quickly. And if you're already a customer, getting your data into this format is a great first step, because this is where most organizations kind of are already, but they're using the model differently, or so this is where you want to scope your initial I would say transformation into the CSDM. The other thing too is that our change management, incident management, all those functionalities out of the box are using this model this way, and additional functionality to the out of the box features will start using it more, right? So we're just going to be automating the use of this information in this structure through analyses, through form pre-populations, things like that. So to make your world much easier and a lot less having to customize forms and do it differently depending on your taste.
So let's go ahead and talk about the tools. Again, what does it take to be successful? You've got to understand the structure. You've got to know how the tables relate to one another, but you might also need to really start thinking about some tools. We talked about service mapping, which we'll touch on that again here in a second, but Discovery, if you're not currently using Discovery, you want to think about how you're populating your CMDB. Manually populating your CMDB is probably not a realistic way to go, and to really think you're going to maintain that data long term. So if you don't have some tool for capturing what you have in your environment, putting that into your CMDB and keeping it updated, you may need to start looking at something like Discovery. Discovery is an agentless tool that scans across your entire environment. You define your IP ranges, and then as it sees devices on your environment, it starts pinging those devices to get information about what they are. It brings that information back and populates that into your CMDB. And it can help with things like traffic-based discovery. So it can find where your computers are connected to certain routers and switches and things like that, and help you build some of those relationships so that you're not doing it manually. And it will pull back on servers what applications are installed on those servers. So as Mark talked about, you don't have to buy service mapping. You could have Discovery running out there, seeing what applications are installed on your systems, and then use that information to map those applications back to the application services. And then you have your map built out from there, but then you do have to maintain that, right? But it can be done. You can use Discovery without service mapping to build that. Just requires a little bit more work. Service mapping, on the other hand, is that top-down discovery. When you define your application services, you give it an entry point, turn service mapping loose from that entry point, and it goes down and starts discovering all of the elements that make up that application service. So for each of your deployments of any given application, you define the entry point, let service mapping go collect that information, and then it runs periodically and it keeps your information up to date. Really good tool for helping you maintain the relationships of all the CIs and infrastructure that make up your application services. What defines a entry point? It could be a couple things. It could be a HTTP entry point. It could be CI, things like that. There are a couple different options for what you can choose from to define your entry points within service mapping. And then finally, as we talked about a little earlier, the APM, Application Portfolio Management. If you're going to take the time to define your business applications, you really want to have something that's going to help you maintain that data. Understand, again, when new applications are being brought into your environment, APM helps you have a process for onboarding applications, a process for evaluating your applications, and then an offboarding process to help you if you are going to try or you are going to retire an application from your environment. APM can help you with those processes and help you maintain that data and keep it accurate. So those are some tools. There are other tools out there that you could definitely look into, but for especially these areas of CSDM that we're talking about, I thought these were kind of 3 key tools that you may want to put into your tool belt. Mark, anything to add on to there?
No, in APM, it does do more than just app portfolio management too. One of the things that I'd like to point out is that it looks at your technology using the same model. If you have SAM, it'll bring in SAM lifecycle data. It also helps to manage the capabilities if you do have business capabilities defined. So there is a little bit of a misnomer in the naming there. And like you said, we don't need the products to do all the capture of data if you have other sources of data or you want to just manually manage it. The purpose of our products to automate and use this data, effectively, right? Not have to worry about the structure. But that's kind of how all these products come about. Service mapping. You don't want to have to do all this manual of drawing relationships between discovered CIs. This will do it for you. So that's really the point of these products, is that we're trying to just make it easier for you to adopt and leverage the platform and all in the data that is shared.
Thank you. All right. Go on to the next slide and talk about some benefits, right? Why do you want to take the time to do this? Why do you want to go through this process of following this framework and getting your data into the right tables? We pointed out a few benefits here, but I do want to note that this is not by any means an exhaustive list. The CSDM, as you saw from Mark's early slides, it really stretches across the entire platform. It can drive benefit in a lot of different areas, but we want to just point out a few benefits in case you need to be able to evangelize and go sell why you need to start reorganizing some of your data and spend some time in this area at your organization. So within ITSM, the full impact visibility, as we talked about with the business, the dependency map, you've got a server that reports an issue or somebody reports an issue on a server, to be able to go and see what the real impact of that is. If you've got a shared server and it's actually taking down multiple application services instead of just one, you really want to be able to see that, and you really want to be able to understand what the impact of your incident or your change, like I talked about, if you're going to do a change against a server or a group of servers, what's the real impact of doing that change in your environment? Accurate routing, once you define all your groups, your support structure for your application services and your CIs, getting the right team involved quickly, and you're not bouncing tickets around to different teams to try to figure out who's supposed to support it. You have that stuff defined, you get tickets to the right people first, really going to lower your cost of support because you don't have as many hands in the pot, if you will, per incident or change. And then better prioritization. This is one of the key benefits that we see with a lot of people, especially just getting through the crawl phase. If you don't have this information defined, a lot of customers deal with this issue where you have multiple servers go down, and their server teams or their database teams or whoever's dealing with the issue are spending time troubleshooting in one area, only to find out that they're really spending a lot of time in an area that's non-prod, while at the same time you've got prod servers being impacted, and you really need to be focusing there. So you can better prioritize your support. So when you have things like that, you have multiple incidents happening at the same time, you're not spending time on a non-prod environment and while your production environment is also down. So ITBM and ITAM, as we talked about, this isn't SAM, but it can absolutely benefit you on the SAM side of things and on your project portfolio side of things. The total cost of ownership, right? To really understand what you've got invested into an application. What are all the CIs and hardware that make up that application? What are all the support elements that have to be in place to support that application? It really does allow you to get a much better view of your total cost of ownership for any given application. Identifying and mitigating risk to your applications kind of goes back to that full impact visibility, to be able to really understand what the risk is or what the impact of a risk is that comes into your environment. And with APM, doing the application rationalization, right? Understanding my cost, then you start doing evaluations against how your apps are performing in your environment. You can rationalize whether it makes more sense to spend money there, to invest in it, whether it makes more sense to leave it as is, or possibly start looking at replacement tools if that application is costing you a lot and really isn't giving you a lot of value. It's kind of hard to do that without having tools like this and having the data in the right places. And then on the ITOM side, just a couple of benefits. If you're using event management, I see this one a lot. I've done a lot with event management. Being able to, again, get that accurate routing as events are coming in. You can correlate events together. really get to the root cause, figure out who should be working on this event, this issue, get them involved, as opposed to getting 3, 4, or 5 different teams all involved just to find out that the root cause was network or the root cause was database. And this having this data structure in place allows you to really get to that root cause faster and get the right teams involved much faster. And then the targeted outage notifications. Users can subscribe to services within the CSDM. So if you do have outages that are impacting a service, you can actually target the notifications to make the right people, get the right people notified of the possible outage in your environment, and get the information to the right people faster. All right, I think we have another poll here before we switch over to talking about your journey and how you kind of go from wherever you currently are to moving into the next phases. So how long have you been on ServiceNow? And not you personally, this is kind of your environment, right? How long has your current environment been on ServiceNow? Are you new to ServiceNow, or have you been on it for quite a while? While that's going, there's a good the question that was posted into here. What's the downside of not taking these steps? Will or Mark, do you want to chime in on that?
Yeah, I mean, the crawl, walk, run, fly phases, we introduced those so folks that are trying to either, if they're brand new or just trying to move their data into the right structures, or don't know where to start, or providing sort of that guidance on that, the core, and work out from there. I would say you don't need to start with there if you've already got good data somewhere else in service definitions, business service definitions. By all means, use them earlier in your journey. But most organizations, they need something that they can build upon, and I think what we've introduced is logically what most organizations can accommodate.
Yeah, and I think one of the things is also, by the downside to not doing it, it actually impacts your other deployments as you start rolling out new applications in ServiceNow. If you have this data in place, those deployments and that realization of ROI comes along a lot faster, as to where if you don't have this in place, if you don't have this infrastructure put in place, you don't take the time to define these. When you are rolling out those other applications, it's going to take you longer to roll it out and to fully realize the benefits of some of those other applications.
Yeah, absolutely. The application service, if you haven't noticed in the model, is what connects everything together. It connects your design to technical, to operations, to services. It becomes the junction point for everything. So if you don't have those, there's everything else is sort of crippled.
All right. So what was our poll results?
Awesome. So it looked like 37% of people said they've been on the platform for over 5 years. 25% have been on the platform for 3 to 5 years. 35% is 1 to 3 years, and only 2% is less than 1 year.
Okay, so most people have been on it for at least a little while, and that does impact you because, as you'll hear from Will in a minute, some of these tables were not available to you, just a few releases past. So Will, talk to us about the journey.
Yeah, well, absolutely. And the question that is always on my mind after hearing this presentation is, how do we start getting these benefits in our organization? What is it that I have to do to be able to get all of these cool things in ITSM and ITOM and ITAM, all those different pieces? And of course, if you can start early and you can start now, the better you're going to be. So putting all of this together, putting all this information together, and putting your plan together, and the controls and governance that you're going to need is going to help you really avoid the costly mistakes that we've seen a lot of our clients make. So we're giving you 4 kind of broad steps to start your journey here. And the first is identify why you're doing this. What is the main motivation that's going to help me with my leadership and my justification to get this done? If you're feeling a pain point in a particular area, if you have a department or a client that is feeling the pain because we're using some sort of a customized form or we don't have this infrastructure in place yet, that can help us with our use case and with getting the resources that we need to get this going. Once we've identified why it is that we really are doing this and the benefits that we want to get out of it, then we can do our gap analysis and identify where we are in the maturity of this. it is definitely a thing of evolution. We don't start one day with everything being perfect. So doing that gap analysis helps us understand where we are and what the next steps are going to be the most effective moving forward. The next step is adopting a comprehensive governance structure. And you've heard Jacob talk about this, you'll hear me talk about this, and you'll hear us go over this again and again. And it really is that important to us, that you have that governance structure, that you have the appropriate teams that are participating in your processes, that you know who's responsible for the, which is our next step here, the different data domains and who owns those, right? We know that there are all sorts of teams that are participating in these processes, from your enterprise architecture teams and your database teams and your application teams. Everybody has a piece of the puzzle and they have a stake in this data. So identifying who's responsible and who's providing what types of data is going to help you get started on this journey. But if you're like most of our customers, you probably already started on your journey. And if you have started on your journey, you may have noticed that in previous releases, the tables that we're using today were not there. And in a lot of cases, we've had to create custom tables to do what we need them to do. There were types of data that didn't have a table that made sense, or we ended up using the wrong tables because the label seemed like it was close enough, or we just weren't sure what the function was behind the table, and so we went with it. So we like to help our clients get back to that baseline. If you can avoid having to completely rebuild your entire CMDB, that's something that we would love to help you do, because there are steps you can take to avoid doing complete rebuild. So 5 of these steps we've listed here for you. Number 1, of course, is back up your existing data. Before you do anything, before you consider do anything, make sure that you have a copy of exactly what you have now, so that if the worst happens, you always have your original data. The next step is to perform the attribute mapping. For example, if we have data that's been put onto a custom table, we need to identify which attributes that are on that custom table, which data points about our CIs are going to need to be carried over to the correct tables, and which fields and which attributes on those tables are going to need to be populated. The challenge with the attribute mapping sometimes is that it's not necessarily just a direct attribute mapping. There are a lot of the many-to-many and dependency type relationships that exist too. And so you have to consider not just the direct attribute relationships, but also these many-to-many type records that may need to be created. You also need to identify any dependencies on these existing tables or existing data that you have. So if you've modified your incident form to look at a different table within the CMDB, or you've built processes around these custom tables, or you have other places in the system that are referencing these tables and these fields that could be scripts, all sorts of places that could be dependent on this data. We need to identify all of those up front. Once we've done that, we can begin to refactor all of these different attributes. We can start to do any sort of transforming that needs to happen. If we have a free text value that's on one of our custom tables, but now we're expected to have a reference choice from a table, we're going to need to make sure that we're performing the appropriate lookups there and creating records and those types of things. And then the last piece will be to perform the actual migration. So once we've gotten all of these pieces put together, we'll actually be able to do the migration from the appropriate tables, the old tables to the new tables. You can see this is really kind of a complicated process, and it can be kind of long. Of course, we want to make sure that planning, that being the most important piece, is done correctly. And that's why ServiceNow recommends that you work with a certified partner to be able to do these things. After doing several of these types of migrations, it's really important to have that experience and to have somebody on your team who really understands the impact of this data and where these things typically live. Mark, Jacob, any additional comments?
I would just say, yeah, you guys are a great partner for us, and I think that you've got the CSDM down pretty well. And as one of our partners that are, looking at leading in the CSDM perspective, I think that's what a lot of customers want to hear, right? And I think the journey to get there is going to be different depending on where you're at, what you've got. So it really requires a partner approach to, jump in there and kind of figure out, what's the lay of the land, so to speak, and and how to move you forward. So we really, I thank you as a partner to help us deal with all these customer demands.
Absolutely. And we're here to help. So if you have questions after this presentation, looking for some guidance on where to start or what it's going to take, feel free to reach out to our team so that we can get you some answers and point you in the right directions.
All right. And speaking of that, some additional resources that you might want to take advantage of. The first is the CSDM community page. I'm sure a lot of you guys have community logins for asking questions, but a lot of people don't know that there's a whole community page dedicated to CSDM. So get out there, subscribe when new information gets released, or if you want to have discussions with other people about CSDM, it's a good place to get out there and get some answers and get the latest information about CSDM. Now Learning, there has been a CSDM fundamentals course that's been released. If you haven't taken it, it's a really good course. It doesn't take a whole lot of time, but it really does cover a lot of good information for getting you going with the CSDM, and it's free. So it's something that you can also, as you're working with other teams and maybe you're identifying champions that are going to help you roll this out from other areas of IT, it's a really good thing to start them off, is to say, hey, go take this quick free training on Now Learning, to give them that level set to start from, so they're not just coming in blind. And then the ServiceNow docs, there's also, just like the community page, there's a whole area inside ServiceNow docs for Common Service Data Model. Obviously, ServiceNow updates that every time they have new information, so you want to make sure you know where that is, stay on top of it, and as they release 3.0, which is coming out, I'm sure the docs and the community site will be the very first place you'll want to go to get that information. Mark, any other resources that you can think of?
I think you kind of covered it there. The fundamentals will be updating every release as we update our CSDM. It's like I said, it's not a one and done. We're going to keep evolving that. We're also going to add product use case documents in that fundamentals training. So we'll show you how each of our products interfaces with the CSDM data. And the ones that we got teed up next are going to be customer service management, which is a hot one. Asset management, that's another one that's pretty hot. And there's a couple other ones I can't remember, but every release we're going to be updating the training. And the community is really just hot. I mean, in terms of answering questions. If we couldn't get to your questions or something comes up later, just go to the community. And not even ServiceNow, other customers are answering each other's questions there, right? That have been through the journey or have some examples that maybe we didn't have. So those are the things that I would really go to.
Yeah, earlier somebody asked about, is there some documentation that would help with the translation of the ServiceNow terms to other people in IT? And I had mentioned in the question and answer that there is a white paper. There is a 2.0 white paper. I'm sure there will be a 3.0 white paper when that is released. So that's a really good documentation. And you're right, those use cases that you guys put together to show specifically for different applications within ServiceNow, how you can benefit from the Common Service Data Model within those different applications are really good. So definitely good documents to pick up.
Yeah, and one more thing that we're working on right now, we had a lab at the Knowledge 20 conference, and it was sold out within 24 hours. I mean, we just filled it all up, and people were screaming to get in. So we're going to be putting that into the Now Learning. So I'm working through that now. We'll record it. We'll provide that as a video, but we'll also put it into Now Learning so you can take the CSDM lab yourself, right? So you can just log in, get an instance. It'll walk you through how it all works. So it'll take you through a tour of about 12 different products, and we'll add to that as we add more of those use cases.
And Chris asked about getting information about subscription-based notifications. You can get that in the docs. Probably search subscribe to service. That's one of the ways you can do it. You may have to build some notifications specifically around what you want to send to those individuals, but you should be able to find that information in the doc site.
Awesome. Now it looks like we have about 2 to 3 minutes to do some more Q&A. So if anyone has any questions, please send them in. But I don't know if Jacob, Will, or Mark, I know you guys have been answering some questions. Were there any in there that stood out that you kind of wanted to go over with everyone?
Yeah, the one that was interesting is, the difference between a business service and a technical service. And you'll notice in the model, there's parity. The two sides look similar. The only difference is there's a technology consumer over the orange area, right? The technologies area versus a business consumer in the other area. It's really context is what makes the difference between those. And I see technical services more as your building blocks. It doesn't add direct value to your business, but they're building blocks, things that you need to do in a development environment. You need to get into a dev environment to build an application that provides value to your business. So, but it's a philosophical problem where folks, depending on context, we wanted to rationalize when we started this whole effort. We found 100 different types of service represented in our platform, 100. And that's just way too many to understand, let alone implement. So our goal was to consolidate that down to a more manageable set. And if I were, writing the check here, I would just say a service is a service. It's how do you want to present it, and who are the users, and what does it do? That's all just context. And I like to use AWS as an example because AWS, everybody knows what Amazon Web Services is. That was an internal service. That was just a building block for internal Amazon people. They turned it out into the market and turned it into a lucrative business. And so the context is what changed. Everything else was pretty much the same.
Awesome. And it looks like Richard just asked, is it possible for application services to inherit attributes from the parent business application? For example, description or managed by group?
So where we're going from a product standpoint is we're going to be implementing, if you got a development background, it's called model view controller. The data model is what we're talking about with CSDM. The view is really the product views and forms and lists and that sort of thing. The controller bit is the management of the view to the model so that you don't have to worry about moving data around. And so we'll be adding more logic, more automation to the creation of data so that we can either query it through the model or propagate the values like descriptions through the model as appropriate to kind of alleviate the manual work required to keeping the model whole. But that's kind of where we're going. We're really putting a lot more logic in. And another little preview for Paris, there's going to be an application service wizard that will take you through the creation of an application service. So depending on whether you want to use service mapping, if you own that, or a tag-based approach, that will automate the process versus having to figure it out, piece by piece.
Awesome. And it looks like Jean just asked, so application service is where you list multiple entries for each of your environments of an app?
Each of your deployments of that application, yeah. So if you, like I said, if you've got regional deployments and you've got US, China, Europe, you would list each one of those deployments, and each one of those would be an entry point, especially if you're using service mapping.
Yep, pre-prod and prod.
Yep, absolutely, environmental as well, prod, test, QA, dev, each one of those environments, those deployments would be listed as a separate application service because all the infrastructure underneath it, that's what you need, right? Is for your dev deployment, these are all the CIs and infrastructure that make up that dev deployment. For your prod deployment, you want the same thing. So yes, you would list each one of those depending on how each of your applications are deployed. So you may have a mixture of some applications are, dev, QA, staging, prod. Some applications are regionally based. So it doesn't have to be just dev, QA, staging, prod. It can be however your applications are deployed.
Awesome. And now it looks like we have one more time for one more question. Is CSDM mandatory or just a guideline for ServiceNow?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. It started out as purely best practice guideline, right? It's turning into governance, and internally we have basically a mandate for all products and all product units to use it. What it comes down to is we've broken down, we've got 10 principles now. We'll see that in the next version. And we're going to stick by those principles and further detail those out to make sure that every product unit is doing the right thing. So internally at ServiceNow, it's really not a choice. If you're using our products, right, you're going to be using CSDM underneath the covers, right? So I encourage you to start moving your data over so that you can benefit from additional products or new features that we come out with.
It's a
Awesome.
very strong guideline as opposed to a mandate. How about that?
It's gotten stronger, right? I mean, it's one of those things where, like,
Yeah.
wait a minute, it's overwhelming how much demand there is for this, because even internally, I'm a bit worried because so many customers want to talk to us, like, and partners, but you guys are taking on I would say, the customer direct interactions. And now we've got so much demand to really flesh it out internally, and even new products coming down the pike that will use this data. Things like business continuity planning, okay? New products will be coming that use this data. So I would encourage you to start using it now.
Awesome.
Yeah,
Now,
I would absolutely echo that. It seems like a lot of our customer interactions we decided that we didn't want to go through the effort of setting it up correctly the first time, so we did a quick fix with a new field or a change of reference, but later on we're paying the price because now we've got a lot of development work to catch up with where we need to be.
awesome. Now, I know we're 2 minutes from the top of the hour. Jacob, Mark, or Will, do you have any closing remarks that you want to make for the group?
Just thanks for everybody being here. Thank you, Mark. Thank you, Will, for doing this with me. I really appreciate it.
And thank you for having me. And thanks for all the great questions. And you're great hosts. Thanks you guys at GlideFast.
Awesome. Now I'm going to announce the winner of the $50 Visa gift card. And it looks like the winner is Chris Pascos. Congratulations. We'll email you your prize directly. And if you didn't win today, don't be discouraged. Every GlideFast on-air webinar that you attend gives you an entry into our on-air grand prize giveaway of a mirror workout, a $1,500 value. And we'll select the winner for that in late June. I'd like to thank everyone, especially Mark from ServiceNow, for joining GlideFast today, along with Jacob and Will. We hope if you have any other questions, don't hesitate to reach out to the GlideFast team or Mark as well. And we hope you enjoyed it. And to view more GlideFast on-air webinars, just check us out on our website. Thanks, everyone.